Do you see that the case of Israel believes that the next enemy is Turkey because of the situation in Syria? That would bring, it's not just about the United States staying in the region fighting Iran, it's about what is the perception of Washington of the West Asia. Is that going to be a new war? Is that a new conflict? Or they're going to have some sort of understanding of the position of these two. There are two countries, two important countries in the West Asia, Iran and Turkey. And Israel wants to fight both of them at the same time. And what is that for Washington?
Just quickly, it's important to emphasize that Israel's grand strategy for dealing with the greater Middle East is to take any country that is potentially powerful or is actually powerful and to weaken it, if not wreck it. This is what they'd like to do in Iran. And they fully understand, the Israelis, that Turkey and Iran are two countries that have a lot of people, a lot of human capital that's capable of producing sophisticated weaponry and a sophisticated economy and so forth and so on. So the Israelis not only want to weaken Iran, they want to weaken Turkey. They see Turkey as an adversary that has to be dealt with. And if you listen to Naftali Bennett talk, who is a former Israeli prime minister and might be a future Israeli prime minister, you quickly understand that the Israelis have their gun sights on Turkey as well as Iran. Iran is the number one problem at the moment. But were they to finish off Iran, they would quickly pivot toward Turkey. Now, the problem here is that the United States has good relations with Turkey. Furthermore, Turkey is a member of NATO. What happens if Israel attacks Turkey? Does the Article 5 guarantee come into play and the United States come to the defense of Turkey the way it's supposed to come to the defense of the Baltic states if Russia were to attack those countries? I think that, if the Israelis attacked Turkey and we sided with the Israelis against Turkey, this would have enormous consequences for NATO. But putting that aside, the last thing the United States wants is for Israel and Turkey to get into a war. We will put enormous pressure on the Israelis not to pick a fight with Turkey. So I think, despite all of the rhetoric coming out of Israel about how Turkey is a potential enemy that has to be dealt with now rather than later, that's not really going to add up to much.
When Donald Trump comparing the war with Iran to what has happened in Vietnam, in Iraq, and Afghanistan, it comes to everybody's mind that maybe he's thinking of an endless war, a new endless war against Iran. And how is that? Do you think that's happening in the mind of the establishment? I'm not talking about Donald Trump himself. I'm talking about the deep state, the establishment in the United States.
Well, I think more and more people are coming to realize that we have no way of ending this war quickly on favorable terms. And then the question is, do you get an endless war? Does this look like Afghanistan? Or do we cut a deal here? And I think it's more likely that we'll cut a deal. I don't think you're going to get an endless war. I don't think we have the munitions to go on fighting for month after month. And I also think the potential economic damage of this war continuing is great enough that President Trump will try to shut it down again. And as I've emphasized, you want to remember, we did shut it down once. The Memorandum of Understanding on June 17th was designed to put an end to this war. President Trump signed that memorandum. And it was very clear, if you listen to J.D. Vance, who was his point man on this issue at the time, the United States was committed for a brief period of time to ending this conflict, because it is not in our interest for this conflict to continue, number one. And number two, If it continues, we're not going to win. We don't have a war-winning strategy. So I don't think this is going to become a forever war. It's not going to end up looking like Afghanistan. I may be wrong, but it doesn't look like that to me. It looks like at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have to go back to the negotiating table. And the big problem that we're going to face is that the hardliners in Iran will have much more influence this time around than they did in the run-up to the June 17th memorandum.
If they cut a deal, finally, what would that bring to the American bases in GCC country? And how do you see that somehow reshaping a new security architecture in the region? Many people are talking about maybe Turkey. There is a military alliance between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. And Kuwait was talking about maybe they want to join that. And these sort of talks are happening. Nothing official, but with the case of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, they signed an agreement that they're going to defend, Pakistan going to defend Saudi Arabia if something happens to Saudi Arabia. How do you see the situation if that deal happens between Iran and the United States?
Well, I think if you get a memorandum of understanding that looks like the agreement that you had on June 17th, it's just a bit more favorable to the Iranians than the June 17th MOU was. I think if that were to happen, I think the American military presence in the Gulf would be greatly reduced. I think it'd be hard to avoid that. And furthermore, I think, for putting the memorandum of understanding aside, I think the Gulf states and the Americans do not have an interest in rebuilding those bases so that they're formidable platforms for projecting power against Iran. And you want to remember, the Iranians are going to be adamantly opposed to having this happen, as they made clear in the June 17th MOU. So I think America's relationship with the Gulf states is going to change in fundamental ways. I think the Gulf states' relationship with Iran is going to change. There's going to be powerful pressure on all the Gulf states to have some sort of modus vivendi with Iran. Then there's the question of China and even Russia. I think China especially, but maybe even Russia, will have more of an influence in the region than was the case in the past. I personally don't see the Turks or the Pakistanis or the Egyptians or any of those countries having much influence on what the security architecture looks like in the Persian Gulf area moving forward. I think that's really up to the Gulf states. It's up to the United States. It's up to Iran. And I think China and Russia will matter here. This is not to say that Turkey will be irrelevant or Pakistan will be irrelevant, but I don't see those countries putting together an alliance structure that's going to have a meaningful effect on security in the Persian Gulf. So that's my best sense of sort of where we're headed. But the details of what it all looks like are just very hard to know at this point in time, because everything is up in the air. We are very much in what I would call a plastic moment. This is a moment where there's all sorts of opportunities to go in different directions, and which directions different states go in, is not easy to know. This is especially true when you talk about a country like the UAE, which we were talking about before. It looks at some days like the UAE is going to join forces with the United States and Israel, and other days it's going to join forces with the other Gulf states, and that they're all going to work out some sort of modus vivendi with the Iranians. Which way the UAE goes really does matter. You can imagine a situation where there's a split among the Gulf states themselves, where the UAE is on one side, the Saudis are on the other side, and we all know the UAE and the Saudis don't get along at all. And that presents a very different situation than one where the UAE and the Saudis are basically in bed together trying to figure out, how to work out some sort of arrangement, some sort of security arrangement with Iran. So all this is to say, we can see the broad outlines of where this is all headed. But in terms of the details, it's very hard to say.
The wars in Ukraine and in Iran, they're bringing Russia and Iran together. As the way it worked with the war in Ukraine, just imagine how was the relationship between China and Russia before the war started in Ukraine. It's just unbelievable looking at the relationship and how close these two countries are together and how dangerous that is for the American hegemony in the region and and not only in the South Caucasus, in the West Asia, in Europe, all together. Because my understanding is that the basic war is between the United States and China. These are all battlefields for Washington. And how is that working for those people who are mastermind of the U.S. hegemony? Wolfowitz doctrine, which was the main objective, was no regional power, no superpower. But it seems these two battlefields are making the situation worse for the U.S. hegemony. And go ahead.
Two quick points. One is that there is lots of evidence that the Chinese and the Russians are helping the Iranians wage their missile and drone campaign against American targets and other targets in the Gulf region. Very important to emphasize that, right? A lot of people think that there's reason to believe that the Russians and the Chinese are providing intelligence that is helping the Iranians hit targets all across the Persian Gulf. And furthermore, they're providing weaponry as well to the Iranians. This would make perfect sense because the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese all view the United States as a mortal enemy. And anything they can do to help each other win against the United States is in their interest. You were just talking about how the Chinese and the Russians have been pushed closely together by American actions, which of course is true. But furthermore, you don't want to underestimate the extent to which Russia and China have been pushed together to help Iran. Because if the United States suffers a humiliating defeat in its war against Iran, that's to the advantage of Russia and China, because again, the United States is a mortal enemy of Russia and China. The second point I would make to you is that there is no question that from an American point of view, the principal threat in the world is China. The United States, since Trump's first term, since 2017, has been committed to containing China. And since 2017, we have been pivoting to Asia. And we have been pivoting to Asia because we believe China is the principal threat. Well, this war in the Middle East against Iran is a disaster for the pivot to Asia, because if anything, we've had to pivot away from Asia. We've had to move forces out of East Asia and send them to the Middle East to fight this war. Furthermore, as I was saying in the course of the program, we are expending precious munitions in the Gulf conflict that we need to help contain China and East Asia. So if there's any country that is a big winner from this war involving Iran, it is China. And if there is a big loser, it is the United States. And of course, that's why China and Russia have a deep-seated interest in helping Iran to defeat the United States.